Okay, welcome back. I hope you enjoyed your break after the long discussion on freezing and seizure and confiscation. I just wanted to say you that a lot of these things will change in the coming years. I'm speaking about freezing orders and seizing orders and confiscation orders, at least within the frame of the European Union, because you have mentioned the directives and the implementation of the directives. In the near future, they will be replaced by a regulation, which is under negotiation already for 2 years in Brussels. And it's a regulation on mutual recognition, so the new, like in the European arrest warrant that you will know well, on freezing and confiscation orders. So that might have quite an impact, because you understand that the systems must be rather similar in order to be recognized. But that's, I think that's for the next training. My topic, as you see there from the title, what I in fact want to do is to focus a little bit on letters rogatory in the general sense, and then gathering evidence within the European Union under the mutual recognition scheme in relation as much as possible to economic and financial crimes, because we have been discussing very interesting topics, but in an open way. Maybe a first question. Who of you have experience with letters rogatory and mutual recognition orders, like the European arrest warrant or things like that, in your practice? You have some, you have some. Okay, so we have several people that at least have some experience. Very good. The first thing maybe I would like to do is to dig in a little bit in when we speak about economic and financial crimes, what are we speaking about? Because that's not that clear maybe. And I will first elaborate a couple of concrete examples, empirical examples, to give you an idea of what the problems can be when we speak about cooperation and this type of offenses. And then you see the whole scheme here. This will be for the whole training. I will not give all the details, of course, of letters rogatory, but I try to give you in the second turn then a little bit the evolution and what is so specific and difficult about these economic and financial crimes. And then at the end we can see a little bit what is on the agenda for the coming time. So that would be more or less my scheme. A couple of examples. And once again, I don't have to invent the examples, they're just coming from reality. My first example, I will not use the flip chart for the moment being, maybe, let's see. My first example, we have a British company. They're British based. A lot of British people are living in Spain, as you might know. Pensionados, they're called in Spain. So they're retired and they go to Spain because it's the climate is good and the food is very good. Huh? Yes.
And Gibraltar is closed.
And Gibraltar is closed if they have nostalgia, things like that. So they're living at the Costas. This company was smart, the British company, and were aware that some of these pensionados in Spain had money to invest. And of course, as you know, the banks, we spoke about with the translator, they don't give any rent today. So the company, British based, was approaching British people, British citizens, living in Spain, direct call, to convince them to invest in a financial product. The financial product was a strange product, but an attractive one. At least they sold it as an attractive one. The product was you invest in art, in paintings. Very famous paintings, Picasso's and things like that. Not to have them at your home. No. They run around, these paintings run around from one museum to another, which is true. And you get a return of 8% netto on your investment on a yearly basis. So they could convince the first year a couple of hundreds of British people who invested, I think the minimum input was €100,000, and they got their 8%. And of course, this is publicity from mouth to mouth. The second year, more people were interested. We said, this is running well, and we get 8%, and so on and so on. until the moment that some of the first people wanted their money back. There was no money and no art. It was a complete pyramid Ponzi scheme. I just add here, this is of course, it's a problem. There were many victims. The harm was over 100 million euros at that time. The company went bankrupt. Who is investigating? Of course, this is an offense, these are offenses, economic offenses, or general fraud offenses, as you want, under Spanish law and under British law. That's not a problem. It's not a problem of offenses. Who has jurisdiction? In reality, the British said that they had no jurisdiction to investigate these cases. Although the company was British and the victims were British. The English prosecutor said, all the conduct has been realized in Spain. Territoriality principle. So, it's for the Spanish to deal with it. And the Spanish prosecutor said, are you crazy? Why should we enforce, why should we investigate and prosecute cases where all the rubbish is British? Nobody did want to step in. And there you have the victims. First case. My second case is also real and also related to Spain. You see, I like Spain. Spain is the biggest fishery nation in Europe. They fish a lot and they eat a lot of fish. Fisheries and fisheries enforcement in many countries are concerned as economic offenses. So we're in a real area of economic crime. Spanish fishermen don't only fish in Spanish waters. We have within the Union what is called a community pound, so the common waters. And as you know, there are quota and a lot of regulation coming from EU fisheries law. I take a specific case. Spanish fishermen are fishing in the waters near to Ireland. They're very active there and they have rights to do so. So they have fishery rights. And they fish a fish which is called in English hake. It's merluza in Spanish. And it's consumed a lot by the Spanish people. It's a good fish. There's nothing wrong with it. The Irish don't eat it. Yeah, you're stupid, you're stupid. They don't eat it. What happens here, the Spanish fisheries, so the Spanish fishermen, they go with boats who are too big. The motor capacity is too big. They fish with nets where the holes are too small. These are all infringements of fisheries regulations. And of course they also catch illegally some fish besides the merluza. So all these are infringements of Irish fisheries laws harmonized through EU law. Of course also infringements of Spanish law harmonized through EU law. The problem here in this case is that the enforcement regime in Ireland of these fisheries violations is criminal law, so it's all criminal law, and in Spain it's purely administrative law. So if the Irish also here are saying, why should we prosecute all the Spanish? The Spanish has to deal with their problem people. We can send over the evidence because they check, they do the inspections in Ireland, of course, in the international waters there, and then they send the evidence to the Spanish. And the Spanish said, yeah, this is not admissible evidence for us. And so they do nothing about it. My third case, unfortunately also a real one. A Dutch firm is making pharmaceutical products. And to make pharmaceutical products, medicine, you need of course some basic products, primary products. We call them precursors, like for the drugs, the same. This company, which has a license to produce pharmaceutical products, buys their precursors in China. It's not occasionally, but China is the biggest producer of precursors for medicine in the world. They buy this not on the illegal market, they buy it on the legal market, and these precursors are coming in with certificates. Quality standard certificates. They use the precursors in the medicine, and this medicine is, what I'm speaking here about in the case, is exclusively sold in Central America. So they're not for the European market. What happens? In one of the purchases and one of the selling contracts in Latin America, in Haiti, near to 20 people die when using this. Was about antibiotics. And the reason was the precursor. This company was prosecuted in the Netherlands under the Economic Offences Act, so of an economic crime, for not having verified and assessed the quality of the precursor and have trusted the certificate, which was falsified. The next one, also a real case. A Canadian company, a lot of Canadian companies are specialized in mining worldwide. They have a license in Colombia and Latin America for mining esmeraldas. You know, the green emeralds, yeah. The mining is legal because they have a license. Why do I bring in this example? Because we have an administrative decision under Colombian administrative law. Of course, there's also international public law on mining. Of course, there are license conditions. The company is not fulfilling with the license conditions. The license conditions can be environmental, can be labor conditions, can be linked to indigenous people who are living in that area, whatever. It might be many license conditions. They don't fulfill with the license conditions, and they export the esmeraldas, of course, worldwide, also to Europe. Two financial cases, because all my cases now have been about, in fact, economic offenses. Two financial cases, also real. A Dutch bank that does not exist anymore, you understand why, called Fortis, was the biggest bank in 2007 in the Benelux, so in Netherlands, Belgium and Luxembourg. This bank was very ambitious, and they wanted to buy another bank in the Netherlands, maybe you know that one, ABN AMRO. ABN AMRO was not the biggest, but also big, so very expensive, and they wanted to take it over unfriendly. They needed a lot of money for that. We were 2007, 3 months before the financial crisis and the collapse of Lehman Brothers in the US. So an unfriendly takeover bid was very costly, and they did two things. First, they made an agreement with two other banks in order to be able to do the takeover. And the other banks were the Royal Bank of Scotland and Santander, a Spanish bank. But even the three of them, that was not enough fresh cash capital to take over the bank. So what I'm concentrating on Fortis, what Fortis did, they are notified at the stock exchange, La Borsa, and in fact they emitted new shares. They said to the consumers, you can buy new shares, and with that fresh income they could take over the other bank. Here we're in financial markets law. We are again in the single European space, because banks have a license for the whole area, and even in the stock exchanges for the whole area. So if you emit shares, in fact, you say to the consumer, that can be you and me, it can be financial investors, pension funds, other banks, whatever. You can buy these shares. You have to inform the consumers on a prior basis. We call that, in legal terms, comes from business law, the prospectus obligation. And just like when you buy a medicine, there is also prospectus on the quality of the product and the side effects. Here it's, of course, an investor wants to know, is this a risky investment? What are the conditions? What will be the possible return? Of course, it's a risk investment. What will be the possible return? And so on and so on. And is the story of the bank, of course the bank was telling that they were smart and beautiful, is this a true story? The prospectus is mostly elaborated by specialized bar lawyers. What was the case also here? And very well paid for it. So that was what the bank was doing, and the prospectus was really brilliant. They were so beautiful and so smart that you should be stupid not to buy the new shares. Even the local governments of Belgium, Netherlands, and Luxembourg, and the bank was active in the three countries, was stimulating on television. Some minister said to the broad public, you should buy shares. It's a question of patriotism. That still works today. 2007, to 3 months later, so they had taken over the bank, so the operation was done. Then Lehman Brothers collapsed. Then the financial market, as you know, entered in tremendous turmoil. And 4 months later, Fortis Bank went to bankruptcy. And the Royal Bank of Scotland went to bankruptcy. Santander survived because they had a lot of income from Latin America. So they were in a better financial position. I concentrate on Fortis. Investigation, the government intervened. The governments did intervene to avoid the bankruptcy. So they nationalized Fortis. They also nationalized ABN AMRO. Otherwise it would have been a complete collapse. And then investigation started. Investigations by, and that's very, very common in these areas, about regulators, so administrative agencies that are controlling banking, and administrative regulators that are controlling stock exchange activity. So we had an administrative investigation in the Netherlands, and an administrative investigation in Belgium, for the same facts, against the same persons. And the persons can here be the legal persons, the banks, the bank Fortis as a legal business entity, but also against natural persons, mostly members of the board, CEOs, because they have been taking decisions. Were also started in both countries, Netherlands and Belgium, judicial investigations for violations of the prospectus, which is a criminal offense in the Economic Offences Act in both countries. In Luxembourg, no investigations were opened at all. That's also very common. They don't care too much about money. So that's also astonishing. During the investigations, quite rapidly, they found out something else. The CEOs, when they had offered new shares with this bright and beautiful prospectus to the investors, to the consumers, at the same moment they have been selling near almost of their own shares. You know, banking people are paid, they have a high salary and then they get a bonus. And the bonus is mostly in shares. So you say to the public, we are nice and beautiful and smart, and you should buy us, and at the same moment you sell your own shares. That smells. It's also forbidden. It's insider trading, and this is a criminal offense, because they trade with privileged information. So we already have two irregularities, which can be administrative irregularities and offenses. My next financial case, I still have two. A financial one and one linked to the environment, and then we go to see the problems. My next financial one is also in the banking area, and maybe you have heard of the case. I don't know if this in Romania was very actual. Have you heard of LIBOR or LIBOR and Euribor? LIBOR, yeah, that's the international one. Euribor is the European one. What is LIBOR and Euribor about? In fact, it's quite easy. All financial products, including mortgages, all the things, loans and things, or whatever you can imagine, of course, they are based on an intra-bank rent on a daily basis. So that's what the banks are earning with the financial products. And it's daily based, and it's based by panels. Panels coming from the banks. So they fix their own earnings, their own rates. So you can imagine that this is very sensitive. Where has this been done? All the time in London, in the city. Both for the international rent and for the European one, so the LIBOR and the Euribor. Also due to the financial crisis, what have we been finding out? That these panels, where the big banks have their representatives, they have been fixing daily rates in a way that they were earning much more than the market, to put it simple. So they have been manipulating deliberately the rates in order to have much more income. Very interesting for the banks, but also very interesting for the people concerned, those who are manipulating, but they got a higher bonus. If the bank is earning more, I also earn more. Who was the victim? All of us. All of us who have financial products. A loan, a mortgage, whatever you can imagine. We're all victims. This manipulation of course there are manipulations of the financial markets. There are in many countries, there are economic or financial offenses, or they are fraud. And then it's interesting, the biggest banks were there, yeah, there were also Dutch banks in the panels, there were also American banks, there were of course banks from all over Europe, Swiss banks. Here also, who has jurisdiction to investigate these things? Of course the United Kingdom, because it happened in the city. And they took responsibility in this case. They investigated, that I must say. I concentrate here on a couple of Dutch banks which were in the panels. The Netherlands said, the Netherlands, that means the regulators and the prosecutors. We wait. We wait to see what happens in Britain, but in reality, who took the lead were not the British, and were not the Netherlands, but the Americans, the US. Even in relation to the European banks, because there were also US banks involved. And the Americans said, we investigate these violations under American law, because you have been trading in dollars, that's the jurisdiction. And if you don't comply with our requests, production orders for evidence and things like that, we close down your business in the US. We retire your license. Now then banks are willing to cooperate, you can believe you. Of course. Okay, last example. Also a real one, unfortunately. A ship, so we're speaking about harbors. A ship was arriving in the harbor of Amsterdam. That's not a big harbor, but it's a harbor, because the big one, of course, is in Rotterdam, as we saw yesterday. The ship became famous. The name was Probo Koala, like the animal. Yeah, shipping, that's a very difficult business. The flag state was Bermudas or something like that. The owner was Turkish. Everything can imagine. Shipping is always difficult. What they had in the ship was liquid. Waste. So full, enormous amount of waste in liquid form. The waste regulations are very complicated. We have international public law on it, we have union law on it, and of course we have Dutch law on it. To put it very, very easy, and this is protection of the environment and waste trade, there are three regimes. Waste that can be recycled quite easily, let's give it a green color. Of course there are license conditions and so on and so on. Waste that is rather dangerous but can be recycled by specific industries who have a license for that. We put to that, let's say, a yellow card or a yellow color. And then we have the red ones, which can in fact not be recycled or are very, very dangerous for transport. Think about industrial waste coming from nuclear energy. This was declared to the customs authorities in the Netherlands as being green color. And there was also a destiny for that liquid, so an industry in the Netherlands who would recycle it. So everything looks okay. The Dutch authorities, the local authorities of the City Council of Amsterdam, which also have powers, investigative powers and the administrative law for the protection of the environment, they didn't trust it, I don't know why, but they sent an inspection to the boat, to the ship. At the moment they already had pumped half of the content to trucks in order to be transported. So half was still in and half was already in the trucks. They found out very rapidly, in a couple of hours, that the content, this liquid, was not green. It was yellow. And that this stuff could not be recycled by the firm in the Netherlands. They were not able to do so. And then you have a problem, because that means that the country would end up with a waste that is not corresponding to the procedure, and of course cannot be recycled in the country. So here there are tremendous responsibilities coming from civil law, business law, from transport law, from the protection of the environment, and of course a couple of people have committed offenses. They at least have been cheating the documents, because the declaration does not correspond with the content. Political crisis in the City Council. What shall we do? You will not believe it. They gave the order to repump the liquids that are already in the trucks, in the boat, in the ship, and gave the order to the ship to leave the country. This is a violation of international public law. But that's not the end of the story. They repumped, the ship left the country, and you know where the content ended up? Not really, but near to the sea, in Côte d'Ivoire, West Africa, and near to 30 people died because they pumped it into the rivers. So this case is still going on in many tribunals, criminal in the Netherlands, civil in London, and so on, because also the insurance company, of course, were involved, and so on and so on. Okay. I think with these cases, what I have been trying to do is to give you the variety of economic and financial offenses. You see in the financial markets, protection of the environment, transport, fishing, and you also see, of course I have chosen my cases deliberately, that some of the cases can be very national, but a lot of the cases have cross-border elements, or the transnational. So that means automatically you have on the table cooperation between countries, cooperation between jurisdictions, cooperation between administrative authorities and judicial authorities. If we go through the scheme of letters rogatory and then in the Union mutual recognition. In fact, my question here is, I will not teach you about, let's say, a classic letters rogatory under the treaties of the Council of Europe. My question is, what is so specific about these offenses? Are they very different from, I don't know, murder or robbery, or do we have specific challenges here? And I would say yes and no. Yes and no. And you will see directly why. First of all, and I will look at the substantive law, so the offenses. I will look at criminal procedure, so the investigation. And of course we have to look, when it comes to all of this, to the cooperation. If you look at these offenses and you look a little bit around, even in the Union, I don't speak about Colombia, third countries, but even in the Union, in a lot of countries, this illegal conducts, if they have been made criminal offenses, and they have been made in many cases, they are still, to a large extent, not considered as serious crimes. The Germans make a distinction in Latin still today, I'm always astonished about it, between mala in se, the hardcore criminal law, murder and robbery and so on, and what they call the mala prohibita, regulatory offenses. Yeah, from some of my examples, I have difficulty to understand that a case like probo koala, of course you can also qualify it as murder, but that will be difficult. But that the case as probo koala is less serious than some robbery in a firm. I don't know why it should be less serious. But you see that, so in many countries, that these offenses are of a lower category. They're not considered as serious offenses, and they also have lower penalties. Certainly when it comes to imprisonment for the natural persons. This of course has consequences, because when we go to cooperation, be it the letters rogatory under the classic scheme of the Council of Europe, or the cooperation under the UN, what you mentioned also under the UN when we speak about UNTOC and UNCAC, so the Palermo Convention and things like that on transnational organized crime, mostly they will not qualify. Because in my examples they are not necessarily organized crime. And if we go to the penalties, the imprisonment, they are mostly to law to qualify. So that means we will not meet the standard of double criminality. Yeah. And for many acts of cooperation, we need double criminality. In the classic standard, but even in the European Union. Come back to that. Another problem related to the incriminations, to the offenses, is that in this area, of the examples I have taken, mostly they have not been harmonized. When I say harmonized, I use it in a broad term. That means we don't have international public law or union law that is saying to the states, this should be offenses in your domestic regimes. There are exceptions, like the prospectus obligations. This has been harmonized under union law. However, also union law is not saying this should be a criminal offense. That's up to the member states. So you see, the content is there, but it can also be an administrative irregularity. So that's also a problem, because if you have a harmonized system, then of course you have more or less equivalent offenses, and you can meet quite easily dual criminality. But if they have not been harmonized, yeah, then the risk of course is very big that you have one offense in one country and no offense in the other, or a different offense. Even in the fields where you see attempts to harmonize this. I take here an example. There is a convention of the Council of Europe of counterfeiting of medical products. My case was not really about counterfeiting, it was about trust in the certificate. But as you might know, today, about 50 to 60% in the European Union of medicine that is sold on the internet. most of these medical products or pharmaceutical products are coming from Asia. China, India, the big producers. Some of this medicine is okay, but that's quite a minority. But of course they are sold without licenses, and they're sold without paying taxes and so on and so on. But the majority of, of these pharmaceutical products, if you're lucky, they do not harm you. Of course they don't cure. If you're lucky, they do not harm you. If you're unlucky, you can die from them. So there is a convention now from the Council of Europe of counterfeiting of medical products. This convention is of 2011. I have verified it this morning again. How many ratifications do we have? Council of Europe are 47 states. 3. Interesting. So we have a tremendous illegal market, a tremendous problem. Member states are negotiating a convention. Ratifications don't follow. And of course no ratification, that means also no transposition in national law. There you go. So, and then you have to cooperate with a reality which is on the internet. Of course it's also in the market, because at a certain moment these products do arrive, because if you buy them on the internet they are sent to you. And there we go. So what I want to say, we have a problem at the level of the offenses, including the level of the sanctions, because they are not considered as serious crime. The second point, and I think that's quite related to what we did yesterday, if we go to the investigations, of course a very interesting way might be to investigate these economic and financial crimes through what? Money laundering. If you earn a lot of money with this business, at a certain moment you have to use the money in order to make an interesting living. Corruption. A lot of this business, of course, will need probo koala. When they went to Côte d'Ivoire, they were bribing the customs officials to get the product into the country. Whistleblowing. For economic and financial offenses, it might be very, very useful to have persons inside the company that are willing to cooperate with the regulators or the judicial authorities and to pass information on what really happened. So if you look at money laundering legislation, and you look at corruption legislation, and you look at whistleblowing, you need always predicate offenses. Mostly, this type of criminality, economic and financial crimes, mostly will not qualify as predicate offenses. Another problem. So we cannot use the special features of money laundering and corruption legislation to investigate these crimes. It's even stronger in the countries, and meanwhile in Europe, where we have criminal liability of the legal person. A lot of European countries, I don't know if it's the case in Romania, don't have criminal liability of legal persons for all offenses. We have in the Netherlands for all offenses. Also in Romania. But a lot of countries which have criminal liability of legal persons for listed offenses. So there's a list. And these offenses are mostly not on the list. So you cannot investigate and prosecute a legal person because this type of offenses are not considered as serious enough for the liability of the legal person. A last point, and you have seen it in my examples, is that there might be a strong interaction and relationship in this economic and financial crime between administrative irregularities, administrative infractions, and criminal offenses. So when you look at the obligations for the firm and the natural persons, they have in fact a double track. They have obligations under administrative law. Not complying with the license is of course also an administrative irregularity. It can lead to the withdrawal of the license. It can lead to administrative penalties, but it's also a criminal offense. So you have a double track regime. That's quite, and it's even worse in the sense that a lot of offenses are dependent upon the definition of the administrative law. If you say it's an offense, if you intentionally don't comply with license conditions, like in my case of the mining, Yeah. What is the content of the offense? It's administrative law, because it's administrative law which is defining the license conditions. So the content, the actus reus of your offense is completely dependent upon administrative law. That's for an investigator, for a judicial authority, it's quite difficult to handle sometimes. And certainly when the administrative law is coming from another country. Seeing the time. If I may say something about the criminal investigation. So when we speak about criminal investigation, we are speaking about investigative powers. We are speaking about evidence, gathering of evidence, that's the whole idea. And of course, in relation to certain safeguards. That's obvious, we're under the rule of law. In this area, the gathering of evidence might be much more difficult than in classic offenses. For many reasons, of course. In a lot of cases, there are no direct victims. The victims are in many cases collective. You don't see the harm in a minute. And if you see it, it's mostly too late. Of course, the structures of companies and of business, and certainly when it's about illegal activity, they do it in a way that is not very easy to gather the evidence. And a lot of evidence here is documentary evidence. It's financial evidence of the money flow, and sometimes also about goods, but goods also, of course, they travel. Moreover, today, I refer to this trade in pharmaceutical products in the digital sense, but also a lot of evidence will be digital, will be what we call today electronic evidence. Why is that? Because our world has completely changed, and also for companies has completely changed. The communications, we do it through social networks. The trade, it's a lot on platforms. But even the records, the business administration is digital. And that does not mean it's on the computer. No, it's somewhere in a provider in the clouds. And of course, it is hidden for third parties, including authorities. And of course, it's mostly encrypted. There you go. So, if you're a regulator, or you're a judicial authority, or a prosecutor, or a police authority, and you have to investigate this type of crimes, that's very cumbersome sometimes, even if everything is in your country. Imagine when you need a cooperation. So that's the reason why in this area they have been elaborating, the legislators, internationally and national, have been elaborating systems to strengthen the gathering of evidence. This can be done through tougher investigative powers. Like in some countries we have at a national level, including in the Netherlands, in the Code of Criminal Procedure, for this type of offenses, we have what is called financial investigations. It's a special track in the Code of Criminal Procedure, where you have less guarantees, less safeguards, and more powers for the prosecutors. If I go to the specialized prosecutor's office in the Netherlands for this type of offenses, which is in Rotterdam, at this prosecutor's office, I will find about 400 people working there, which are not lawyers. Of course, they're in the lead of prosecutors. All these people are coming from financing and accounting, audits. They are the experts, and they are under the lead of prosecutors. That's the only way to get the evidence, to freeze, and so on and so on. That's the reality. Also, of course, to this digital world, that means that you need...
Se poate o scurtă întrebare?
Just a moment, because feel free. Can you repeat your question?
Care este valoarea probatorie a înscrisurilor pe care le întocmesc acești experți? Rapoarte, procese, constatări tehnico-științifice, orice altceva.
Yeah. in fact, these are experts, internal experts. So they help the prosecutor in order to find out where the assets can be, what happened, evidence-related things. So these reports as such are not evidence. As such, they're not evidence. They are a calculation of money flows, of assets. On that basis, the prosecutors or the judicial authorities are taking measures, investigative measures, which can lead to evidence. So it's not that these reports are used directly as evidence of liability in the court. They can be used, of course, in order to justify a seizing order. That's yes. But not as evidence of the criminal liability. That's something else. Yeah?
Am întrebat acest lucru pentru că în legislația națională există această categorie a experților care funcționează în cadrul parchetelor și care întocmesc, de exemplu, constatări tehnico-științifice care sunt mijloace de probă în procesul penal.
Yeah, yeah. We have, in many countries we have of course the same system, but this is in another setting. When we go to the court and speak about criminal liability of the legal person or criminal liability of natural persons, you can imagine in this LIMBA case, you need experts of course because this is very technical. Even in the environmental pro bono case, you need technical experts. The judge cannot. So what you will have is that the judge as such, the court, can nominate experts. This will be mostly independent experts. But also the parties can nominate experts. And the parties here I mean the defendant and the prosecutor. Of course then in such a case the prosecutor can use external experts or can use internal experts if he has internal experts at his disposal. And then the confrontation between the experts will happen at the trial. But that's about the liability. Of course, if you speak about freezing procedures, seizure proceedings and confiscation procedures, that's a whole other stuff. Because then it's a calculation about the assets and the relation with the criminal conduct. That's another story. But so the classical use of experts from parties and from the court itself is very common in many, many countries. Yeah? So I insist on this importance of financial investigations for these economic and financial offenses in order to find the evidence and in order also to find the assets and to calculate the assets. Both. I come back to the encrypted and hidden evidence on the digital setting in a minute. Let me first say something about the evolution in the letters rogatory itself. So, to which extent is international public law, international treaties, bilateral treaties, from the UN, from the Council of Europe, and then, of course, instruments of the Union, helping us to investigate and prosecute economic and financial offenses. If you go to the classic instruments of the Council of Europe, yeah, and it's still used a lot, the letters rogatory. As I said, for this type of offenses, this is very, very difficult and very cumbersome. So not, of course, I will not exclude that it sometimes is helpful, but really, if you have to do it with these instruments, it's quite limited. Although, you see in the latest protocols, also of the Council of Europe, you have the main convention of the 50s and in the more recent protocols, much more attention for the financial evidence. And this is not a surprise because the bilateral treaties that have been negotiated between the United States of America and European countries are also mostly about the financial evidence. The first bilateral treaty that I remember, I think it's 10-15 years ago, that was negotiated with Switzerland and the US, was called in Switzerland Lex Americana. And it was all about banking. Not banking offenses, but evidence in the banks. So you see already in these instruments, even at the Council of Europe, and then later also in the Union, that a lot of the cooperation, letters rogatory, is about what? Information of existing bank accounts, information of on banking transactions, and so that means also the content, of course, and monitoring of financial transactions. So that's in fact online surveillance of financial transactions with blocking orders. And the blocking orders can be secret. So that's very funny. That means you believe as a trader or as a businessman that you have transferred the money from Luxembourg to Singapore on your accounts, everything is okay, but in fact you have been surveilled and the money is blocked, but you don't see it. So in order to avoid that, they run away with the money or they hide it. So they just go on with the business. So you see a very strong importance to this new type of evidence gathering linked to the financial flows. Second, within the Union, we have been moving to this instrument of mutual recognition. You certainly know the European arrest warrant, and that's the main example. The gathering of evidence in criminal matters has been much more difficult. Today we have an instrument which is also transposed in Romanian law, the European investigation order. There has been another one, but it's very difficult there. That means when an order is issued by Romania or issued by the Netherlands, the other country has to recognize it under certain conditions and execute it. However, some one of you have experience with the European investigation order. It's sometimes very complicated still. I don't know your experience. Why is that? Because in the negotiations in Brussels, member states have been trying to build in as much as possible their own regimes because they don't trust each other. That's the reality. For whatever reasons it might be, some member states do protect their own interests, also financial interests. Some say, yeah, we don't trust that and that country because there is too much corruption or whatever. There are always reasons. So what you see when an order is issued, the other countries, the judicial authority of the other country should recognize it and execute it. But then you see a list of exceptions. And you see also, and that is quite new, that in fact there is not double criminality, that's also a necessity, but there is double procedural equality. If Romania, I just take a fictitious example, is asking to the Netherlands an investigative measure that would exist in Romanian law and does not exist in Dutch law, under Dutch law, the Netherlands will not execute it. The instrument, the investigative measures, with all the features must exist in both regimes. That's complicated. And then of course there are also exceptions, even if the regime exists. And another member state can also say, yeah, Romania are very nice and we like you, but what you're asking is a very coercive measure,
Or too expensive.
or too expensive indeed, for all by all economic and financial offenses that for us are not that important. So what you're asking is disproportionate. We execute it, but with a less coercive measure. For instance, Romania would ask for a search in a bank linked to a financial offense. The Netherlands could say, yeah, no, very coercive for the banks. You know, the Netherlands are a financial center. What we will do instead of a search of course is by surprise, we send them a production order. So we send them a letter, under Dutch law they have to cooperate, but of course this is much less a surprise, and it's less coercive. So you see, under this European investigation order there are still many things that are difficult related to this area. The last point, in order to have also some minutes for the discussion. And that's my point linked to this digital world. A couple of days ago, that is very recent, there's a whole discussion going on already for years, the Commission of the European Union has published a proposal for a directive on production orders and preservation orders linked to electronic evidence. What I'm speaking about, we have many cases the last years, I suppose you had them also in Romania, in which prosecutors try to find evidence in the digital world. Because, as I said, this can be the records of the company somewhere in the cloud. This can be communications through platforms or apps or social media. There might be a lot of evidence which is very useful. Traffic data, but also content data, of course. And linked to decryption orders. Otherwise you cannot read it. If prosecutors were sending a request, a production order, to companies like Facebook, Twitter, Google, platforms, whatever, most of these companies, their legal base is in the United States. Most of them. The big players at least. Yeah, Skype and Lux. Yeah, but there you have, but the main. Yeah. So what are the companies saying? We don't cooperate. Mostly they say we don't cooperate. You have to request to the US judicial authorities by a letters rogatory based on the treaties. And then they can contact the company in California. Yeah. If you get such an answer, you can go to your bed because this will not work. So there has been a tendency in Europe to regulate on this, and this is the first proposal, so that prosecutors, judicial authorities, can send a production order to the companies active in the European market. This is exactly the first proposal. So that means if this will become reality, and it will become reality, it still has to be negotiated, but this will become reality. A prosecutor, a judicial authority, this is a coercive measure, so there is an ex ante warrant, judicial authorization, can send directly to a service provider, a social network, a platform, cloud companies, whatever, an order. An order to produce information. Of course you must have an idea of the information you want, but that's the same thing with research and things like that. And the companies, Europe or not European, if they offer services in the European market, they have to cooperate. This is, however, limited. It's limited to existing information. So these are not surveillance orders, like in the banking world. You cannot say to the company, for the next month, send us what this type of communication has been on your platform between person A and B. It's existing information, but also the content. The companies have to comply with this production order within 10 days. So this can be very fast, and it's not channeled through the member states. So it's really judicial authority from place A to a company active in Europe. All companies must establish a legal representative for this type of business. So that means that the prosecutors knows very well who they have to reach in order to send out the order. If the companies are not complying, there are sanctions foreseen under administrative law, and also in some countries this would come under criminal procedure. There are sanctions foreseen under criminal law, like in the Netherlands. If such a company would not comply with a production order, this is also a criminal offense, with a penalty under penal law, under criminal law, and up for the natural persons to 1 year of imprisonment. So the legal representatives have a certain obligation to cooperate under this regime. So there you see, and this can of course be combined with de-encryption orders, because it's useless if you get the information and you cannot read it, because as you might know from your practice, some encryption programs, the good ones, that you can buy on the black market, which are very expensive, they are completely impossible, as good as impossible to decrypt without the help of the persons concerned. There are encryption programs on the markets which cost 10 million euros. So they're very, very sophisticated. So I hope with this contribution I gave you an idea of what? First of all, the scope of these economic and financial offenses. In very different areas. Then the problems we have because of the incriminations. many of these offenses, and I think from my examples you have seen that they can be serious, they are still considered as not serious stuff. And then we see problems with the evidence gathering. It's a difficult field. So if we treat economic and financial offenses as if it would be murder on the corner of the street, yeah, this is of course not work. And then we see that linked to the fact that this crime is considered as second rank, we also have problems with it when it comes to the international legal cooperation, the letters rogatory, and the mutual recognition orders. So I think there is still a lot of work to be done in this area. And questions, remarks, observations to you. Now they're all hungry, of course. Your experience, tell me a little bit, in the light of what I've said, of your experience in this area. Does it correspond, or you're much more positive?
În cazul meu... Ok?
Come here, sir.
În cazul meu a fost o experiență bună pe ordinul european, pentru că infracțiunea pentru care era cercetată acolo și măsura care se solicita în România avea corespondent complet în România. A trebuit să comunicăm între noi un pic pentru a clarifica niște chestiuni. Se cerea o percheziție pentru o adresă incompletă, dar a fost doar o chestiune tehnică, nu de natură legislativă, așa că a fost o experiență bună. În schimb, pe comisie rogatorie am avut o problemă de corespondență a legislațiilor, pentru că tot așa se cereau niște informații financiare de la o bancă și aici trebuia eu să dispun măsura, nu ca în ordine unde se dispune măsura în țara care cere. Și aveam o problemă pentru că în România trebuie să fie începută formal urmărirea penală pentru a dispune orice probă, pe cât în Germania părea să nu există această chestiune și a trebuit să clarific dacă, din punct de vedere legal, măcar situația lor este echivalentă cu cea din România de după începerea urmăririi penale. Deci, inițial s-au speriat foarte tare colegii din Germania că au înțeles că urmează să nu poată să obțină proba din cauza acestei diferențe. Așa că ideea armonizării, care este de fapt undeva la mijloc, poate produce probleme.
What type of offenses were at stake?
Economice, în ambele cazuri.
Yeah. Who else wants to share some experience in this field?
Îmi amintesc, da, dacă se poate, îmi amintesc, apropo de cooperare judiciară, și mă refer în materie penală, aveam o situație în care emisesem un mandat european de arestare pentru o femeie care era cetățean român și fusese localizată pe teritoriul Italiei și trebuia să fie executat mandatul de autoritățile judiciare italiene, care trebuiau să se bazeze pe decizia cadrul din 2002, care reglementează mandatul european de arestare și care este transpusă la noi într-o lege specială. Și răspunsul care venise de la colegii italieni pentru care au refuzat să execute mandatul european de arestare, au spus că nu o fac pentru că cea căutată condamnată avea un copil în vârstă de 1 an. Însă și acum, bine, sigur, probabil că umanitar vorbind, este întemeiat, însă după decizia cadrul, da, emisă de Consiliul Uniunii Europene și care este transpusă în legislația tuturor statelor membre, acesta nu era un motiv nici obligatoriu și nici facultativ, ca să răspunzi. Însă noi am rămas așa cu situația și nu știu ce puteai să faci, că această cooperare judiciară se bazează pe realitate, dar și pe legalitate mai ales. Îmi amintesc de astfel de situație. În plus, tot colegii italieni refuzase să execute tot așa, într-un alt caz, mandat european de arestare, spunând că este și cetățean italian, deși avea mandat de executare, chiar dacă avea și cetățenie română. Dar uitându-mă din nou în directivă, mă rog, așa cum atunci, nu era nici pe departe un motiv ca să refuz, amintindu-mi așa de situații. Și în plus, pe recunoașterea hotărârilor străine, îmi amintesc că tot așa, când aveam într-o cauză la judecată, la instanță, o persoană pentru trafic de persoane, traficul se referea la prostituție, pe teritoriul Austriei, cum vorbeam ieri și cu colegii, ei au venit, inculpatul a venit cu o hotărâre, a adus avocatul și a cerut recunoașterea ei și să se înceteze procesul penal pe motiv că fusese condamnat în Austria pentru aceleași fapte, ceea ce făcea ca să existe autoritate și să nu mai poți să pornești o procedură și în România. Însă pe hotărârea, pe acuzația, pe actul nostru de sesizare a instanței, se spunea că traficase 3 persoane majore și le identificase cu nume și prenume și încă 4 persoane minore, spunea, tot cu nume și prenume. Dar colegii austrieci în hotărârea lor spuneau de acele 3 persoane majore care coincideau, în mod clar, și mai spunea de 20 de persoane majore și minore, fără nume și prenume. Este adevărat că așa coincidea perioada, coincidea, să spun, teritoriul pe care se săvârșise infracțiunea, dar ar fi trebuit, în mod normal, și după regulile noastre interne și regulile de cooperare judiciară în materie penală, ca victimele să poată fi identificate în hotărârea austriacă, să poți să recunoști. Sigur că noi ne-am descurcat, nu o să spun acum care a fost soluția, că mai puțin contează. Însă mă gândeam că și exigențele probabil că sunt diferite. În România presiunea este foarte mare pe justiție, și din punct de vedere mediatic, și din punct de vedere al avocaților, sau nu știu cum să spun, în general lumea este foarte interesată. Ar constatasem, nu? Că din punctul ăsta de vedere, colegii austrieci erau mai relaxați și un pic și mai zgârciți la motivarea, nu știu cum să formulez. Dar evident pedeapsa era mult mai mică. În timp ce la noi pornea de la 5 ani, acolo era o pedeapsă undeva de 8 luni sau un an, ceva în genul. Fapta fiind considerată doar proxenetism. În timp ce la noi erau vreo 4 infracțiuni. Și grup criminal organizat, și trafic de persoane, și mă rog, nu știu mai... Astea sunt probleme, mai sunt alte, dar în general de ce îmi vin în minte acum, și probabil că va dura, pentru că e greu de uniformizat și la mental, să spun așa, și mai ales că sunt condiții sociale, politice, economice diferite, care fac și pe cele judiciare să fie diferite. Mulțumesc.
Thank you very much for your contribution. I fully share your reasoning. If I would be a lawyer, I would say you're right on all points. Thank you. I'm looking at the organizers and yourself. You're satisfied? You want to have lunch? Okay, yeah, shall we do that? Okay. Thank you so much for your attention and discussion.